Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, students, whenever you're watching this video. This is AP Macroeconomics on Mr. McRitchie's webpage, and I am taking care of you guys in terms of learning a couple things for the AP Macro exam. Now, this will be my first of what I anticipate will be two videos over one of the most important concepts in economics, at least one of the ones that in your first unit will help you prepare for the future units the most. Like, you being able to crush this will set the stage for you in future units. Because in this video, and in the following video I'm going to make over it, we're going to be talking about the supply and demand graph and the concepts of supply and demand. The basic idea, and here's the gist of it and why this is important, we're going to figure out why prices change the way they do and why goods sell in the amounts that they do. We're going to talk about price and quantity and how those two things get affected by this behavior, by these two behaviors, the behaviors of supply and demand. And we're going to address some common misconceptions with these two concepts. We're going to go into what things affect these two concepts and how those changes affect ultimately the price and quantity of the goods sold. Now, the good news is these are not concepts that you're not familiar with. In the real world, you understand that things becoming more popular allows for certain things. It allows for larger quantities of the good to get sold, because if people want it more, they're buying more of it, right? And it allows for businesses to charge more for goods, because if people want a thing more, then you as a business can justifiably raise the price. You'll be able to, because people want it really bad. So you can make it more expensive and people will still be buying it because they want it. So you understand this at least in a small scale with your everyday life. I'm going to teach you how to understand it in a more reliable way, a way that is a little more consistent and predictable, and you'll be able to anticipate changes a lot better. So that all being said, let's go into it. So supply and demand. So background stuff you got to know. For at least AP Macroeconomics, there's a couple of vocab things that are important to have here. First things first, market. Buyers and sellers. A market is just a group made up of buyers and sellers of a product. If there are people buying and people selling, you have got a market. Even if it's on a physical place, it's a market. It just has to be the interaction between buyers and sellers. That can be digital, that can be over text, that can be theoretical in some aspects. Now, in AP Macro, we simplify this a little bit, in that if you go to the real world, there are a lot of variables that go into a market, like the quality of the good, the reputation of the business, etc. In AP Macroeconomics, we use what's called perfectly competitive markets. That is a market where every good in that market is exactly the same. What I mean by that is, if we say that this is the market for phones, while I do know that there are different phones and that those phones are of various quality, reputation, different companies, and are tied to things like your service provider, we're ignoring that. We're just saying, overall, these are all the phones. It's fine. Don't worry about it. And the other part of a perfectly competitive market is that there is a large enough number of buyers and sellers so that no one individual buyer or seller can really determine the price. Basically, there are no monopolies, there are no oligopolies in a perfectly competitive market. There is no business or no cartel of businesses that are able to really set the price. And again, the smartphone example is good for this, because companies like Apple and Samsung have been able to effectively control the market price of smartphones over the past decade, just because they have such a large share of that market. So we're saying that when we're talking in this class, to keep things simple, to keep variables minimized, we're going to say that all markets are perfectly competitive. Every time we're doing supply and demand in macro 1, this is not in the real world, this is in macro 1, we'll go by these two assumptions: that every good in that market is exactly the same quality, and that no one individual buyer or seller can determine the price. Cool? All right. So let's go into the one by one here. Demand, first and foremost. All right. Demand is consumers' willingness and ability to buy a product at a price. The best way to think about it is it's how badly we want a good or service. It is not a number. This is an important clarification. The concept of demand is a behavior. How badly you want a thing. You couldn't say, I want a thing 3. Like, you wanting 3 of a thing and you wanting a thing a lot are two different ideas. The amount of a thing you want is the quantity demanded. How badly you want something is demand. And that sort of confusion, that difference, is going to be one of the more important things in understanding the concept of demand. So an example of how this works. So If I were to tell you that I'm willing to give you an A in AP Economics if you give me money. I love this example. Students get very excited by this concept because I don't tell them that I'm lying. This is a lie. I'm not going to actually do this. I'm willing to sell you an A in AP Economics. How much would you be willing to pay? And then I survey the class and I ask them, hey, okay, we're going to do this. How many of you are willing to pay at 20 bucks? And basically everyone in the class is willing. They'd be like, I'd give you 20 bucks for a guaranteed A for sure. I raised the price to 50. A couple of kids who are pretty good at school drop out of this list. Even some of them stay in because they just don't have to do work, which I respect. I put the price at 100. A couple more kids drop down. I've had kids go up as high as $500 in terms of being willing to pay me $500 to get an A in economics, which is wild to me. But I do live in an upper middle class area, so I guess that makes sense. But dang, that's wild stuff. The idea is the higher the price, the lower the quantity. Everyone wants an A in the class. Based on the initial price, just about everybody is willing to pay for it. So everybody wants the A, but the quantity demanded is determined by if you can afford it or not, which is changed by the price. So demand and quantity demanded are two different things. You have demand for a thing if you want the thing. There's quantity demanded based around the price. And that based around the price thing will follow into our law of demand. So if you want a quick visual of what a demand curve looks like, it's a downward sloping line with price and quantity. I'll explain how that works here with the law of demand. The law of demand simply states that the price of an item determines the quantity demanded. That you like things, yes or no, but how much of a thing you're willing to buy is based on the price. The lower the price, the higher quantity demanded. When things are cheap, you buy more of them. That's not surprising. You guys do that all the time. You go to the store and they tell you that like you can get 3 Hershey's bars for $1. You're more willing to buy those 3 Hershey's bars, right? Yeah, because lower price, higher quantity demanded. The higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. When things get more expensive, you buy less of it. So the idea of the law of demand is that the price of a good or service is inversely related with the quantity demanded. It is very important to understand that this is a change in quantity demanded, not a change in demand. Goods getting more expensive doesn't mean you want them any less. It just means you'd buy less of them, which logically should make sense, right? Like you either like or don't like Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper being $1 versus Dr. Pepper being $50 doesn't change whether or not you like Dr. Pepper. It just changes would you ever buy Dr. Pepper. You liking it is demand. How much of it you'll be willing to buy is quantity demanded. Because again, demand is not a number, it's a behavior. It's your desire for the thing. And your desire for the thing is actually not necessarily tied to the price. It's the quantity that you buy is based on the price. So again, and I put this in all caps because this is the thing that gets kids a lot. Changing the price of a good does not change the demand for that good. It changes the quantity demanded for that good. Different thing. An example of a change in demand for a good, man, I have to move my camera around a lot on this one. I put my PowerPoint stuff in different spots for this. A change in demand, again, this is a demand curve. We've got a downward sloping line because at a high price, you would have a low quantity. Because when the goods are expensive, we buy not very many of them. And at a low price, you have a very high quantity. So inverse downward sloping line. This is price, capital P. This is quantity, capital Q. Yes, you should draw this as a heads up. A change in overall demand for a thing would be a shift of the line. So if there is overall more demand for a good, say you want stuff more, the entire demand curve would shift to the right. Because now, at the exact same price as before, there's a higher quantity. At the exact same price as before, I've got a higher quantity across the board for all of them. Let me grab my pen thing real quick so I can use this a little bit better. There we go. I do not need the update. So shifting the line to the right is an increase in demand, and then shifting a line to the left is a decrease in demand. Oops, sorry. That's what the D2 thing is here. If you want a visual example of what's the difference between a change in demand and a change in quantity demanded, let me show you. A change in quantity demanded is based on the price of the good changing. So if I were to say that this good is currently at this price, let's call it $5. I need to make this a little bit smaller. There we go. It's at this quantity, say there's 10. At a price of $5, we'd be willing to buy 10 of this thing. Whatever. If I were to raise the price of the good to like $7, I would now be here on my demand curve with a quantity of, let's say, 8. This movement from that point to that point is a change in quantity demanded. A change in demand is movement of the entire line. The only way you get a change in quantity demanded is by just changing the price of the good, because that's what this is. The Y value is literally the price. So I'm just changing where I'm looking at on the graph. But when I'm changing overall demand, I am moving the entire curve. The line itself is demand, and if I increase demand, I need to increase the line, which is to shift it rightward. If I need to decrease demand, I need to be decreasing the line, shifting it leftward. Okay, so what changes demand? If quantity demand gets changed by price, what changes the actual demand for a good? Got a handy-dandy acronym here, TRIPE. In case you don't know, TRIPE is a food. It is the stomach lining of a cow, which is actually pretty common in a lot of dishes, ethnic dishes like menudo. Have it. It's a Mexican stew. It's very good. Sorry, I got myself hungry just by talking about food. But here are a list of things that can change demand. A handy-dandy acronym. Taste and preferences, related goods, income, population, and expectations of future price changes. When I go through each of these, this will all make sense to you of like, oh yeah, I would want things more or I would want things less based on X. So, first one, taste and preferences. This is based specifically on things like advertising, health considerations, things in the news, etc. So say dark chocolate, we find that dark chocolate is reducing your risk of heart cancer or heart disease. Awesome, demand's going up for dark chocolate then. People don't just want more dark chocolate. They like dark chocolate more in this context. Regardless of the price, regardless of which dark chocolate we are talking about, there's overall greater demand for it. The idea is, it doesn't matter if it's like a 50-cent piece of dark chocolate or a $17 piece of dark chocolate. People are buying more dark chocolate now across the board. They want it more because of this change in health considerations. Ditto for when Chipotle had the E. coli outbreak. People wanted Chipotle less. They didn't want Chipotle as much because there's this risk of disease. So that would decrease the demand. Second one, related goods. 2 vocab terms that show up here. Complementary goods and substitutes. The idea for related goods is that sometimes your goods are connected to other things, to other goods, and that when the price of those other things gets affected, it changes the demand for your own good. An example, if we're talking complementary goods, cars and gasoline are complementary goods. When gasoline gets more expensive, your gas-guzzling cars are less popular. So when the price of gasoline is increasing substantially, like in the early 2000s, demand for a lot of gas-guzzling cars would go down because it's more expensive to drive those things. It's more difficult to get them. It's harder to deal with that. Okay. When the price of gasoline goes down, you'll more likely to see people buy cars that are a little less logical when it comes to gasoline usage. Another example for compliments would be like hot dogs and hot dog buns. It's a great one. When the price of hot dog buns goes down, so you're like, okay, hot dog buns are cheaper, I would be buying more hot dog buns. The demand for hot dogs goes up because you're not just going to use the hot dog bun for everything else. You pretty much only use those for hot dogs. Substitutes are goods and services used in place of one another. So the example in the picture there is Ruffles and Lay's. Yeah, Ruffles and Lay's are both potato chips. If Lay's got cheaper, people would be buying more Lay's and demanding less Ruffles. They wouldn't want Ruffles as much anymore because now Lay's is cheaper. They're going to be buying that and not needing Ruffles. So these are things where the price of another thing is being affected, but it's going to affect the demand for your good, initial good, based on the fact that people's behavior will change based on that change in price. Third one, income. Easiest one, logically speaking. When you have more money, you buy better stuff. When you have less money, you buy worse stuff. That's technical terminology for it. The phrase here is normal goods and inferior goods. A normal good is a good where when you have more money, you buy more of it. Think higher quality products, like going to Whole Foods or Central Market, or places that are like higher quality for groceries. Those places sell you normal goods. When you have more money, you're more likely to go there. Places like Walmart's grocery section are in the inferior goods category. Not because you're bad if you buy them. It's just they're really cheap. So when you have less money, you buy that stuff more often. So if your income rises, your demand for normal goods like steak or computers or like high quality goods goes up. And your demand for inferior goods goes down. When you have more money, you buy less of the not good stuff, you buy more of the good stuff. That's the idea there. P is actively easy, which is population. If there are more consumers, you've got more demand, because demand is actually a sum total behavior. The more people there are, the more demand there is for stuff. The less people there are, the less demand there is for stuff. That's not complicated. So more population, more demand, less population, less demand. Boom, easy. And the last of the demand shifters, expectations of future price changes. This one you understand, actually. It sounds complicated, but examples work out for you guys. If you think the price is going to go up in the future, when do you want to buy the thing? Right now. If you hear on the news that a hurricane is coming to hit a major port city like Houston, then a lot of people in those time periods go and fill up on gas. Why? Because they understand that when a port city like that gets hit, oil becomes more expensive and less available. So the demand goes up before the thing actually happens. If you expect it to go up in the future, you want it more right now. If you expect prices to fall in the future, demand decreases now. This happens every year in fashion, where you know things are going to go on sale in like a month because you've been kind of late to the party. So you're just like, you know what, I'm going to buy my hoodies in March or April, because at that point they'll start to go on sale because it's no longer winter and no longer very cold. So your demand decreases when you think the price is going to go down in the future. It also works for the stock market, obviously. So those are our demand shifters. So let's practice the idea of shifting demand. What I want you to do is draw a demand curve. If you have the one earlier, feel free to use that. What you're going to want to do is draw changes on that graph based on each of the following scenarios. What you're drawing is the market for beef in June. Specifically June, because the time for the expectations thing does matter. So you're drawing demand, downward sloping line, price and quantity as my two axes, and you're going to either shift the line or shift a point on the line, like I showed you a little bit ago, based on each of the following scenarios. Will demand go up, will demand go down, or will it just be a change in quantity demanded? Go to that list of tripe, those things, and follow your brain. Your logic can guide you through this. Understanding, just thinking properly, will allow you to do these ones. Supply and demand is entirely built on logic, and demand is a much easier one because you guys are consumers. Draw new lines to account for the following changes. Always start at the initial line and then shift from there. And go through these 6 scenarios. You will either be drawing a line or a new point on your line. And the way to tell is if it's a change in demand, which is the stuff from tripe, you will move the entire line. The only thing that changes just quantity demanded is a change in just the price of the good right now. So we got these 6 scenarios. Let's go through them. Right? Pause the video and then go through these and then draw them yourself. And we're back. So going through them, you have your initial demand line. The first scenario is the price of beef is going to rise in July. All right, the price of beef is going to go up in the future. What do you do right now? I want beef. It's going to be more expensive in the future. I want to buy it more right now. So this would be an increase in demand. I take my demand curve, I shift it over to the right. 2, E. coli outbreak. E. coli is a bacteria that is found in beef a lot of the time. Don't want that. That will decrease demand for beef. I'm not going to want beef as much if that's happening. Immigration into the U.S. increases. As long as there are people from a country that eats beef, which is most of them, that should be just fine. If they come from like a vegan colony, then maybe this wouldn't happen, but for the most part, we can assume increased demand for beef there. Price of pork drops. Well, that's weird. Wait, pork isn't beef. What's going on here? Gotta think. We got taste and preferences. This isn't that. You got R is related goods, substitutes, and complements. Wait a minute. Pork is a substitute for beef because you could either like eat beef or eat pork. Those are both like, large scale proteins. So if pork is cheaper, what will people do? Well, they'll buy pork. So for beef, they wouldn't want beef as much. If they're buying more pork because pork is cheaper now, they wouldn't exactly want beef as much, right? That's the idea. 5, the price of beef falls right now. The most common assumption here, this is where students get trapped, is they're like, okay, price of beef is lower, I want more beef, or I like beef more now, I'm going to increase demand. That is incorrect. Go back to your notes a little bit ago. Look at what you wrote for law of demand. Okay, wasn't that long ago, it was about 12 minutes ago in the video. Law of demand. Law of demand states that changing the price of a good does not change the demand for that good, it just changes the quantity demanded. Beef being cheaper doesn't make me want beef more or less. It just changes the amount of beef that I'm going to purchase. So beef being cheaper will increase the quantity demanded, and visually will look like I'm moving on my line. I have a visual for you on the next slide, so don't worry, you'll see it. But it'll look like a movement along my line. 6, final one, a charcoal shortage. What is charcoal to beef? I mean, like I use charcoal to grill a lot of the time, so I guess that matters. It does. Because if charcoal is running out, then grilling will be harder. I won't grill as much, so I wouldn't need beef as much. That would be a complementary good to beef, would be charcoal, because use it for grilling. So we've got increased demand for 1, we've got decreased demand for 2, we've got increased demand for 3, decreased demand for 4, increase in the quantity demanded for 5, aka F, and decrease in demand for G. Let's show you what those look like on the graph. So the increased ones are just a shift of the demand curve to the right. The decreased ones are a shift of the demand curve to the left. And F, again, I mentioned was an increase in quantity demanded, which looks like, wait a minute, you moved down the line, McRitchie. What is that? Why did you do that? Because the scenario said price drops, right? So this is my price, and the price is going down. So I'm just going to move down along the line because I now have a lower price. And if I move down along the line, looking at my X values here, I've got a higher quantity, right? Quantity demanded refers to the quantity of a point on your demand curve. So we go from this quantity demanded at that higher price to this quantity demanded, or this quantity demanded at this lower price. They lowered the price, I buy more beef. Doesn't mean I like beef more, because I like beef however much I like beef, but it means I buy more or less of it based off of that. So there's demand. Now let's go into supply. You can feel free to take like a 5-minute breather in between the two. It's okay. These are different behaviors. They just work similarly. So, supply. Kids hate this because this is the part where they're like, I know what supply is, McRitchie. It's how much of a good exists. Wrong! You're wrong! You're a big old wrong person who likes being wrong about things. Yeah, supply is a misnomer in the real world because when we talk about the supply of goods, we're usually referring to the actual amount of the good that exists. That is not what it means in this context. Supply in the context of the supply and demand graph is the producer's willingness and ability to sell a product, which you're like, yeah, it's like, no, read that again. Their willingness and ability to sell the product. Does it say amount of product anywhere in there? No. It is not the supply of something as we use it in the common word. It is their desire to sell the product. The same way that demand is our desire to buy something, supply is their desire to produce and sell it. It's not an amount either. It is just also a behavior. So while in normal speaking terms, it does make sense to say the supply of something is like 100,000. In the context of this graph and this class, it does not make sense to say that because supply is just demand, but for businesses. It is instead of how badly they want to buy, it's how badly they want to sell. So it's like yin and yang to demand. Just like demand has, the supply curve has the law of supply, which says actually kind of the same thing. The price of an item determines the quantity supplied of that item, but it actually works in reverse to the law of demand. The law of demand said that lower prices meant higher quantity demanded because things are cheaper, you want to buy more. If you're a business, though, it goes the opposite. If you're a business, lower prices, you don't want to sell that good as much. It's not going to make you as much money. You don't really want to produce and sell that thing if it's commanding a lower price. Remember that price is how much it's selling for in the market. So at a lower price, you would have a lower quantity supplied. I'm not going to want to make this product very much and sell it if it's not making me a bunch of money. The higher the price, the higher the quantity supplied. I would produce and sell more things if they were commanding a higher price in the market. So the law of supply is that the price of a good or service is directly, positively related with the quantity supplied. Price goes up, quantity supplied goes up. Price goes down, quantity supplied goes down. Again, changing the price of a good, it changes the quantity supplied of the good, not the supply. If you're looking for an example of this, think you own a lawnmower and you're thinking about mowing lawns. If you were getting paid $20 per lawn, say these are like lawns where it would take you let's say 2 hours to mow the lawn. $20. How many lawns would you be willing to mow for $20? You're like, a couple. Like I would do a couple. That isn't terrible, but not super great. If they're giving you $50 per lawn, I would be willing to mow more for sure. I would mow like 5 or 6 of them at least. And if they're giving you $100 per lawn, like 10 would be great. I can make $1,000. Let's do that. So I would do 10. The idea here is, do you like mowing lawns? Whatever, I don't know. Your desire to do it is supply. That's not really changing here. What's changing is the amount of the thing I'm willing to produce and sell. I want to mow lawns as much as I want to mow lawns, which is not based on the price. But the amount of lawns I'm willing to mow is based on the price. Because you're the supplier. You're supplying the mowed lawn thing. So at a higher price, you would want a higher quantity. No, there you go. So supply, as opposed to demand, is an upward sloping line. Because again, low price, low quantity supply, don't really want to produce and sell stuff if it's not making me a bunch of money. High price, high quantity supplied. Just like the demand curve, a rightward shift of your supply curve is an increase in supply. This is a thing that you need to actually visually look at, because it sounds obvious. I'm like, yeah, I moved it to the right, I increased. No, look at the visual that I drew for you, though. Because in this drawing, it does feel like I drew it moving downward, right? Like you could argue this is a decrease in supply, because you could easily emphasize this movement, because it does move downward. It is not about verticality on these supply and demand curves, because they're parallel lines that kind of theoretically go on for more than just what I'm showing you here. Like they technically do this. So it's not about verticality, it's about horizontal movement, because at the exact same price as before, like there, I now have a higher quantity. At the exact same price as before, I have a higher quantity. So an increase is always a rightward shift. Rightward means increase. Leftward means decrease. Do not think of it in terms of up and down. Think of it in terms of left and right. Like that's a leftward shift of the supply curve. But guys, I literally, in like the PowerPoint, I moved that line vertically up. Does not matter that I did that. Because if I'm looking at the quantities, I'm looking at this price. Okay, that quantity right there is less than that quantity right there. So S2 is less than S. Decreased. So it's always left and right for increase and decrease. Be very careful about that. Gets people all the time. All right, supply shifter. Couldn't make this acronym into something that is relatable and words that make sense, so I use SEPN for my supply shifter. Competition, expectations, profitability of alternative, profitability of joint supply, that one rarely comes up, input costs, and natural or man-made phenomena. So these are your list of supply shifters. I will write one of the acronyms my students use. I will not say the word out loud for sake of this is a very stupid acronym, but students like to use this one. In my class, NICEPP. If that one works better for you, if you are a very, I have dumb third grade brain, but this will help me remember it better because it's stupid and I can laugh a little bit when I think about it, go for it. I'm going to refer to SEPN the entire time. Okay, so SEPN. Competition, easy. This is just like population was in demand. Competition, number of producers in the market. Less producers, less supply. More producers, more supply. Whenever new companies enter into a market for the first time, they are increasing the overall desire to produce and sell the good. When Google started making phones, there was an overall increase in supply of phones, right? More producers, more supply. Fewer producers, less supply. So it's just like population was. Expectations. This is expectations of future price changes again, except this is from the producer's perspective. Remember, businesses want to make as much money as possible, so If they think prices are going to go up in the future, when do they want to sell their good? In the future. So they want to sell it less now. They'd want to scale back right now so that they can then sell all that stuff in the future. So when prices are going to rise in the future, they supply less now so they can sell it at a higher price in the future. If they think the price is going to fall right in the future, they'd supply more right now. If they know the price of their good is going to go down in the future, they want to try and clear it out right now. That's why businesses put things on sale before they go to clearance, right? They're trying to get rid of it before anything else happens. Okay, other P. Lots of text here only because students struggle with this vocabulary thing. Profitability of alternative goods. Alternative goods are just different options for a producer to make, like Ford making Mustangs and these trucks, like the Ford F-150. The idea is if you can make more money making one of those two goods, you will allocate resources towards the good that will make you money and away from the good that won't. So if I'm using the Ford and F-150 example, let's assume that Ford finds that the F-150 is a lot more profitable than the Mustang. Okay, well then they would want to produce more F-150s and want to produce fewer Mustangs. So supply of Mustangs go down, supply of F-150s goes up. If it's Coke and Diet Coke and Coke Zero, actually the Diet Coke Coke Zero thing is a good example because this actually happened with Coca-Cola. So if Coca-Cola company finds that Diet Coke is declining in profitability because people are buying it less and less and less, then they would scale back production of that and scale up production of an alternative, a different option for them. In this case, Coke Zero is what they decided to do. They scaled back Diet Coke, scaled up Coke Zero, basically just shifted the levers of allocating resources. In terms of where students really struggle with this is that they get kind of stuck between, is this an alternative good or is this a substitute? Because alternatives means it's a supply shifter, substitutes means it's a demand shifter. And that's very important because if you can't tell the difference between the two, that you're gonna actually make mistakes on test questions. Because the question will ask, hey, does this change supply or demand? You're gonna be like, wait, is it a substitute or an alternative? They seem like it's the same thing. An alternative is a different option for the producer, meaning it has to be made by the same company. That's why I'm saying like Mustangs and F-150s, because those are both made by Ford. I'm not saying Mustangs and Teslas. Those are made by different companies. Mustangs and Teslas could be substitutes for consumers, but they're not alternatives for producers because they're not made by the same company. Coke and Diet Coke are alternatives. Coke and Pepsi are substitutes. Things that are made by different companies can't be alternatives because the business doesn't have the option of allocating resources towards one or the other. So alternatives are different options for producers. Substitutes are different options for consumers. Perspective. Again, I mentioned that with like the first couple PowerPoints. Perspective is everything. This one is very useless, I think. Profitability of goods in joint supply. This rarely comes up on the AP exam, but it's when you have an increase in the supply of one thing that yields multiple outputs. Like if we say there's a bunch more cows, then there would be a bunch more leather, milk, and beef, even though they're not all used for the same thing. Like the same cows we use for leather aren't the same cows we use for milk or beef. But the general conceit is goods that are in joint supply will go up together. Now, the profitability part is if we find that milk is more profitable than beef, then you're going to see supply shift away from beef and towards milk because they're made from the same joint supply. They're made from the same resource. So you'd see more cows being reared for milk and less cows being used for beef. You'd see an allocation of the resources shifting around there. This is the most important one. This is the one that shows up by far and away the most. Input costs. This has to do with the idea of cost of production. How much it costs to produce a thing affects a business's willingness and ability to make it. If it costs more to make a thing, they can't make as much of the thing, right? And if it costs less to make something, they can produce more. So the idea is if you change any of their costs of production, which if you go back to last week when we did like factors of production, when we did like that pizza example, there's an insane amount of things that go into that. If it costs less to produce, supply goes up. If it costs more to produce, supply goes down. Some examples of things that are good here, and I would write all these down. These are all very good, like vocab buzzword things that you'll see in a question and be like, oh, input cost. If any of your factors of production or your raw material resources that you use to make a product become more expensive, supply goes down. If your technology gets better, more productive, useful technology, your supply would go up because you can produce things more easily. If your productivity levels grow, for whatever reason, that could be because your workers become smarter or whatever, increase supply. If the government starts regulating your business a little bit harsher, making you take stronger safety precautions or keep on the lookout for more regulations and things like that, cool, then supply will go down because that's an extra cost, an extra sort of burden for the business. Those could be like appropriate, but it still makes it harder for the business to do things. So if it's easier or more expensive, if it's easier or cheaper to make something, businesses will be able to make more of it. If it's more expensive to make something, they'll be able to make less of it. It's pretty easy to think about, but it's the most frequently occurring one by a lot. Input costs is probably like 70% of the time. It's a supply question. It's going to be input costs. Last one, natural or man-made phenomena. Certain events, namely things like natural disasters or weather, but a war, a riot, or a strike would also work. Usually those things will either take away resources from a place, take away usable labor from a place, whatever. You can have it be positive. This is rare, but like in agricultural terms, if they were to tell you that like unnaturally great weather for the growing period of corn, that would probably increase the supply of corn because nothing bad happens to the corn. That's pretty good. Stuff like that. So it can be positive. It's just almost always a negative thing that like this bad thing happens that decreases your ability to produce stuff. Okay, supply shift practice. We're going to use the iPhone for this. So we're using a supply curve for the iPhone 11 specifically. Specifically the supply of iPhone 11s specifically in fall of 2020. Just like with the demand curve thing, you're going to draw new lines to shift it, or you're going to draw a point. Again, you'd only draw a point if it's just the price of the iPhone 11 that's being affected. Oh, that should say iPhone 11 there. Let me fix that real quick. There we go. Sorry, that's an old. This question gets changed every single year because there's always a new iPhone, so I just have to modify everything by like one. So you're going to draw new lines to account for this, okay? So draw your initial supply curve, upward sloping supply line, and then get ready to draw ones to the right and to the left based on these scenarios. Pause the video, and let's go over it. So if we're looking at the supply of iPhone 11s in fall of 2020, and Apple's planning on lowering the price of iPhone 11 in the winter, because they do that, right? They start to lower them around winter every single time. What'll happen to the supply of the iPhone 11? Well, if they plan on lowering the price in the winter, they're going to try and sell it when? Right now. If it's going to get cheaper in the future, they'd rather sell it now. So the supply, again, is their desire and ability to sell or produce and sell. They're going to want to sell it more right now. They're lowering the price because they know they need to in the future, but they want to sell it more right now. That's why you'll see a lot of like ad campaigns for the product right before the product is going to get marked down because they want you to buy it before they mark it down. 2, China passes new labor laws requiring higher wages for their workers. Oh boy. Bummer for Apple because they make their stuff there. If they have to pay their workers more, can they produce as much of the good? No. Remember that supply is their desire and ability to make stuff. So if it gets harder to make things, supply is going to go down. Earthquake destroys an Apple plant. Same idea. It's harder to make stuff. Supply is going to go down. Apple releases the iPhone 12. That's an alternative for Apple, right? They're going to start allocating resources towards the iPhone 12 and away from the iPhone 11. So for the iPhone 11, again, that's what this is. This is specifically a graph for the iPhone 11. For the iPhone 11, the supply is going down because they are increasing / creating the supply of the iPhone 12. They're going to have to use the same resources and factories they were using to make the iPhone 11. They're going to move those away from the iPhone 11 to make the iPhone 12. Then 5, nationwide increase in labor productivity as Gen Z, that's you guys, enters the workforce. A bunch of better, smarter workers means we are more productive. Productivity goes up. Ability to produce goes up. So for these, it would have been like, if I'm imagining my supply curve, increased supply for 1 and for 5, decreased supply for 2, 3, and 4. If you're thinking about the, I need to move my camera because I'm actually drawing this on there you go. It's like that. If you're looking for the, hey, what about that movement on the line thing from demand? Can that happen here? Yes. If any of these scenarios had just said increase in the price of a good right now, you would do that. You would move along your supply curve up the line. So if it's just changing the price of the good right now, present day, current, you move along the line. If it's anything else, if it's anything that could be fit into that SEPN acronym, again, that's competition, expectations of future price changes, profitability of alternatives, Profitability of joint supply doesn't come up a lot. Input costs and the natural and man-made phenomena. If it's any of those things, you would change the overall supply of the good and service. Okay. Now, in terms of supply and demand, that is not all about supply and demand. That is all about the individual lines. The next video will go over what happens when you put these two lines together and how can we figure out what's going to happen to the price and quantity of goods as a result of these shifts. Like, okay, we've got the supply and demand graph. We've got these two lines. We see this trying to pass this new labor laws thing. It's going to affect supply. How does that affect the actual real price of the good now? What does it do to that? How does it affect the quantity of the good? We'll talk all about that in the next video over supply and demand. Okay, so this is the first one. This is just introducing you to the two lines. Make sure you review the law of demand and the law of supply. Changing the price of a good does not change the supply or demand for that good. It just changes the quantities demanded and the quantity supplied. So be very careful about that. Make sure you got your acronyms down. It's TRIPE for demand, it's SEPN for supply, and know what those things stand for. And then be aware of how you manipulate the graph. Rightward shift, increase. Leftward shift, decrease. Every time, both lines. Cool? All right. That's video number 1 on supply and demand. We should have one more video on supply and demand. Might have to do 2. I don't think I will, but I think I only have to do one other video for supply and demand. We'll see. But that is it. Thank you guys for watching. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to leave them in the comments section of the video, and I'll respond to them best I can. Thank you all very much, and have a great one.